He did not lose her in an argument. He did not lose her in a courtroom. He lost her the moment he put both hands on her back. His 8 months pregnant wife standing in the rain with a suitcase, and shoved her off the curb like she was something he was finished with. His mother watched. His mistress filmed it. And then all 3 of them went back inside, poured drinks, and celebrated. They had no idea that within 4 minutes, 2 unmarked black SUVs would appear at the end of the block. No lights, no sirens, just quiet, absolute authority arriving in the rain. They had no idea that the paramedic who reached her first would look at the pendant at her throat, go completely still, and speak 4 words into his radio that would change every single life in that apartment forever. 4 words. We have a Montgomery. Stay with this story. Because what happens next is not just justice. It is the kind of ending that reminds you exactly who you should never underestimate. Lesson statement. The quietest woman in the room is not always the weakest. Sometimes she is simply the one still deciding when to begin. If this story stayed with you, if you felt something shift when she walked into that ballroom, or when she sat on the floor of her father's kitchen and got back up anyway, then you already understand what this channel is about. We do not tell stories for entertainment alone. We tell them because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that silence is not surrender, that patience is not weakness, and that the people who get underestimated do not stay underestimated forever. If that means something to you, leave a comment below. Tell us which moment hit hardest. Tell us if you have ever been the person in the rain. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss the next one, because the next story is already waiting, and it belongs to someone just like her.
Rain does not fall in Hartford in late October. It attacks. It came down in sheets that Tuesday night, flooding the gutters on Birchwood Avenue, bending the young maple trees sideways, turning the streetlights into blurred orange smears against a sky that had gone completely black 2 hours before it had any right to. Inside apartment 7, on the 2nd floor of the Birchwood Arms complex, a woman stood near the front door holding a small suitcase. She was 8 months pregnant. Her name was Claire, and she had not said a single word in 23 minutes. She just stood there, one hand on the suitcase handle and the other resting against the lower curve of her belly, watching 3 people dismantle her life with the efficiency of people who had rehearsed this exact moment. Her husband Derek stood in the center of the living room with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Behind him, leaning against the kitchen door frame like a judge who had already signed the verdict, was his mother Barbara. And on the couch, legs crossed, phone angled upward, recording everything with a small, satisfied smile, sat Amber, Derek's coworker, Derek's other woman, the one Claire had known about for 4 months and never confronted, not because she did not care, because she was waiting. Barbara spoke the words she had clearly been saving for years. Derek recited the lines his mother had written for him. Amber zoomed in on Claire's face and whispered something cruel enough to make herself laugh. Claire said nothing. She picked up her suitcase. Her fingers brushed the silver compass rose pendant at her collarbone. A small, elegant thing, a sapphire at true north. The kind of craftsmanship that did not belong in this apartment and never had. She held it for one breath. Then she opened the front door and walked into the storm. Derek followed her onto the porch. He looked at his pregnant wife standing in the rain, suitcase in hand, belly round beneath her soaked jacket. He looked at her the way you look at a problem you have finally decided to stop managing. And then he shoved her, both hands, hard. Claire went off the curb, knees first, palms. Then her belly pressed against the cold, wet asphalt as a truck swerved around her, horns screaming, headlights cutting through the rain like two furious eyes. She lay on the public street, 8 months pregnant, rain pouring over her body. From the porch, she heard Amber laugh. From the doorway, she heard Barbara say, finally. And she heard Derek walk back inside and close the front door without looking back. Across the street, 74-year-old Ruth Gallagher had been watching from her porch with a coffee mug and increasingly wide eyes. She called 911 with shaking hands. The paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. The lead paramedic, Danny Kowalski, 28 years old, with careful hands and sharp eyes, saw the compass rose pendant as he secured the stretcher. His hands went still. He looked at the sapphire. He looked at Claire's face. Then he stepped back and spoke into his radio, not the standard channel, in a voice that had gone very quiet and very focused, all at once. 4 words. We have a Montgomery. 2 black SUVs appeared at the end of the block 30 seconds later. No lights, no sirens, no markings of any kind. They moved through the rain with the quiet authority of something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Danny's partner, Kevin, 24 years old and 11 weeks on the job, watched the SUVs pull in and said softly, "What is a Montgomery protocol?" Danny finished securing the stretcher and said, "You see those 2 vehicles that appeared out of nowhere?" Kevin said yes. Danny said, "That is a Montgomery protocol. Now stop talking and help me with these straps." Back inside apartment 7, Derek was already on the couch with Amber, scrolling through his phone. Barbara was in the kitchen, making tea. None of them saw the SUVs. None of them heard the radio calls. And not one of them had the faintest idea that the woman they had just thrown into the rain was worth more than everything they would ever earn or touch or dream of in 20 lifetimes combined. To understand who Claire Montgomery really was, you have to go back 26 years to a private estate sitting on 60 acres of Connecticut countryside, hidden from the road by a wall of old-growth oak trees and monitored by a security infrastructure that rivaled small government installations. The estate belonged to Edward Montgomery. Edward Montgomery was, by every credible measure, the most quietly powerful man in American private medicine. His company, the Montgomery Medical Trust, owned hospital networks, pharmaceutical patents, artificial intelligence diagnostic systems, and research facilities operating across 4 continents. His net worth had crossed the $1.4 trillion threshold 8 years ago and had not looked back. He had never given a magazine interview. He had never appeared on a morning show. He had never attended a gala with his name on the donor wall. He built things the way certain men build cathedrals, brick by silent brick, until the structure spoke for itself. He had 1 child, 1 daughter, Claire. Her mother died of a cardiac complication 4 hours after delivery, a cruel, arbitrary failure that all of Edward's money and all of his medical infrastructure could not reach in time. He never fully recovered from it. He never spoke about it to anyone who had not already lived inside that grief with him. What he did instead was raise his daughter, not with money, with presence. He drove Claire to school himself every morning until she was 16 and got her license. He sat with her at the kitchen table during homework, drinking coffee and reading reports, available without hovering. He coached her soccer team for 2 seasons, despite knowing almost nothing about soccer, and the team lost most of their games, and neither of them cared. He read to her before bed until she was 11 and told him gently but firmly that she could read on her own now. Thank you. He taught her chess in the garden and let her win until the afternoon she beat him honestly, and he smiled wider than he had in years. When Claire turned 16, Edward took her out to the garden on a Sunday afternoon in late May. He sat her down on the stone bench beneath the oldest oak tree on the property, and he placed something around her neck, a silver pendant, a compass rose with a single sapphire set at true north, the Montgomery family seal, handcrafted by a jeweler in Geneva who produced exactly 4 pieces per decade. He held his daughter's face in both hands and looked at her the way fathers look at the person who carries everything they love into the future. The world is going to test you, Claire Bear, he said. Over and over, people are going to want what you have and overlook who you are. But this compass, when you hold it, you remember something. You never need anyone's permission to know your own worth. Not mine, not theirs, not anyone's. You already know. Claire grew up soft, not weak. There is a profound and frequently misunderstood difference between those two things. Weak is what breaks under pressure. Soft is what absorbs the pressure and stays whole. She chose nursing school at 24. Edward offered to build her a hospital. She smiled and told him she would rather work in one first. He did not argue. He had learned, over 16 years of raising this particular person, that arguing with Claire Montgomery was roughly as productive as arguing with the tide. She graduated with honors. She took a position at Hartford Community Clinic and worked double shifts on Tuesdays. She was, by every account from every colleague, exactly the kind of nurse you hoped for when you were frightened and in pain, calm, present, competent, and possessed of the specific gift of making people feel seen without making a performance of it. She was 25 when she met Derek Shaw. Community Health Fair, east side of Hartford, a Saturday morning in September. Derek was running a blood pressure screening station with genuine enthusiasm and a smile that arrived quickly and stayed a while. He was handsome in an uncomplicated way. He made her laugh twice in 4 minutes, which almost nobody managed. He never asked about her family. He never asked where she came from or what her background was. He asked what her favorite book was, what she thought about the election, whether she preferred coffee or tea, and if tea, what kind, because in his opinion, the answer to that question revealed significant information about a person's character. She thought his not asking about her family meant he liked her for herself. She was right at first. They dated for 14 months. He proposed with a ring he had saved 4 months to buy, down on one knee in a restaurant that was slightly above his budget, nervous in a way that was completely genuine. She said yes before he finished asking. She told Edward first. She sat across from him in his study and told him she wanted to live a normal life, not as a Montgomery, just as Claire. She wanted to know what it felt like to build something without the weight of what her name carried. Edward studied her face for a long time. Then he nodded. He did not agree. He could see things from where he sat that Claire could not yet see from where she stood, but he respected his daughter too much to substitute his judgment for hers. He shook Derek's hand at dinner 3 weeks later and said very little all evening. On the drive home, he told his head of security, James Calloway, who was also, inconveniently, Claire's childhood best friend and a Harvard-trained family attorney, to keep a quiet detail within range of his daughter at all times. Honor her independence, Edward said. Just do not actually honor it. James said, that is not what independence means. Edward said, I know what independence means. I also know what fathers mean. James said nothing further on the subject. Claire married Derek in a small ceremony. She moved into his apartment, She kept working at the clinic. She wore simple clothes, drove a practical car, and never once said the name Montgomery in Derek's presence. The only piece of her real life she carried into this one was the compass rose pendant. It stayed around her neck through every shift, every argument, every quiet evening when Derek came home late and smelling like someone else's perfume, and she lay awake, doing the calculation that all betrayed people do, figuring out exactly how much of what they feel they can afford to show. The first year of the marriage was good, genuinely good. Derek was warm when he was not anxious, and funny when he was not performing, and kind in the small daily ways that matter more than grand gestures. They cooked dinner together on Sundays. They drove to the coast in October. He remembered how she took her coffee without being reminded. The second year, a promotion he had counted on fell through. Something shifted in him. Quiet at first, then louder. He started measuring himself against other men and finding himself perpetually short. He started looking at Claire's steadiness and reading it, wrongly, as complacency, as if her peace was an accusation about his restlessness. The third year, Barbara started whispering. Barbara Shaw had raised Derek alone after his father left when Derek was 7 years old. She had worked 2 jobs. She had sacrificed real things, and she had built a throne out of that sacrifice. A throne she sat on in every room she entered, requiring constant acknowledgement of what it had cost her to be there. She controlled her son through guilt, through crisis, through the gentle, ongoing suggestion that no one else could possibly understand what he needed the way she did. Every decision Derek made ran through Barbara first. Every relationship he pursued required her approval, explicit or tacit. Claire required neither. From the very first Sunday dinner, Barbara looked at her daughter-in-law and recognized a problem. Not because Claire was difficult or demanding, because she was not. Claire was calm, unbothered. She did not react to Barbara's sharp comments about her cooking. She did not compete for Derek's attention. She did not seek Barbara's approval or flinch when she did not receive it. She just sat there, present and peaceful and entirely self-contained. And that drove Barbara out of her mind, because you cannot guilt-trip a woman who asks for nothing. You cannot manipulate a woman who does not react. Barbara had spent 40 years controlling every room she entered, and here was this quiet young woman sitting at her table and needing absolutely nothing from her. And the entire architecture of Barbara's influence had no purchase on her whatsoever. So she went to work on Derek instead. "She's hiding something," Barbara said. Over Sunday roasts and phone calls and casual asides at family gatherings, no woman with no background and no connections is that calm unless she has something she is not telling you. Why doesn't she ever talk about her family, Derek? What is she hiding under all that quiet? She planted the seeds with the patience of a woman who understood that doubt does not need evidence. It only needs repetition. And Derek, a man who had always measured his own worth by how much attention someone was willing to give him, who needed to be the most important person in a room to feel safe in it, was fertile ground. When Claire announced her pregnancy at the beginning of the third year, Barbara did not smile. She pulled Derek into the kitchen and said, "Are you certain that child is yours? No evidence, no logic, just cruelty in a maternal costume." But she knew her son. Once doubt entered Derek Shaw's mind, it sat there like a splinter. Small at first, then infected, then impossible to stop thinking about. Then Amber Cole arrived. She transferred to Derek's office 8 months into Claire's pregnancy. She was sharp and loud and deliberate, and she wore her intention to be noticed like a second outfit. She identified Derek within 2 weeks. as a man carrying a significant amount of unaddressed resentment, and she offered to take it off him. "You deserve more than what you are getting," she told him, over drinks after work one Thursday. "You deserve a woman who actually sees you, not some quiet ghost drifting around the apartment like she is already somewhere else." Derek drank every word like water. What nobody knew yet, what Claire would not discover until much later, was that Amber Cole had not stumbled into this assignment. She had been placed here deliberately by a man named Victor Hale, who had spent 11 years methodically searching for a crack in the Montgomery family's armor. Victor was a rival of Edward's, a man who had lost a significant hospital network acquisition to the Montgomery Trust in 2013 and had never made peace with it. He had identified Claire 2 years earlier. He had tracked her marriage, and when he needed an operative close enough to Derek to extract financial leverage, Amber had been his choice. She was good at her job. She had not expected to find a man this easy. The affair started with late nights at the office. It became weekends. It became phone calls taken in the bathroom with the water running. Claire noticed everything: the specific shade of lipstick on his collar, a coral she had never owned, the perfume on his jacket that was not hers, the way he turned his phone face down every time she walked into the room. She cataloged all of it in the careful, methodical way that nurses catalog symptoms, without alarm, without rushing to diagnosis, building a complete picture before making any move. She said nothing. Not because she was weak, because she was her father's daughter, and Edward Montgomery had taught her one thing above almost everything else. "Never make a decision when you are angry," he had told her once, during a chess game in the garden when she was 12 and furious about a move she had not seen coming. "Anger makes you fast. Wisdom makes you right." So she waited. She held her compass pendant. At night, when the apartment was dark and Derek was somewhere he should not have been, and she let the weight of the silver remind her who she was. The despair found her anyway. She went to Derek's office on a Wednesday afternoon in early October, 8 months pregnant, carrying lunch she had made that morning. A small, deliberate act of ordinary kindness that she had allowed herself, despite everything, because she was still that person. She had not stopped being that person, and she was not going to let any of this take that from her. She found Amber sitting in Derek's chair, wearing Derek's jacket, going through his email on his computer with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had done this many times before. Derek walked in behind Claire, saw the scene, and in the 3 seconds that followed, made the worst decision of many bad decisions. Instead of explaining, instead of taking any responsibility at all, he looked at his 8 months pregnant wife and said, "This is not what it looks like." Amber looked at Claire's belly. Then she looked at Derek. Then she looked back at Claire with an expression of amused contempt and said, "Honey, it is exactly what it looks like. We have been together 4 months." Claire stood completely still for 7 seconds. Then she said, "Okay." She picked up the lunch bag. She turned around. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited for the doors to open with the concentrated focus of someone using every available resource to hold themselves together. In the elevator, alone, the doors closed. She pressed her back against the wall, slid down until she was sitting on the floor, knees up, one hand on her belly and the other pressed flat against the cold metal, and she cried. Quietly, completely, the way she had not let herself cry in months. The grief that had been building since the first night she smelled someone else on his jacket, finally finding its way out with nowhere left to hold it. She cried for 4 minutes. Then she stopped. She pressed her palms to her face, breathed, and stood up. The doors opened on the ground floor. She walked out. This is what therapists call the second wound. The narrator paused gently here. Not the betrayal itself, but the moment the person who betrayed you watches you break and chooses, consciously, to do nothing. If you have ever felt that specific kind of helplessness, not from what someone did, but from watching them watch you suffer and not move, then you know. That is the wound that takes the longest to close. Not because it is the deepest, but because it teaches you something you cannot unknow about who that person really is. Back at her car, sitting in the parking garage, Claire pulled out her phone. She scrolled to a contact labeled only with the letter D. She stared at it for a moment. Then her phone rang. James Calloway, calling from his office, completely unaware of everything because his timing had always been absurd. She answered. James said without preamble, "Claire, I need to tell you something outrageous. A client just offered to pay my retainer in cryptocurrency. 14 Dogecoin, Claire. I went to Harvard Law School. I argued before the Connecticut Supreme Court." 14 Dogecoin, she laughed, genuinely. A short, surprised sound that she had not heard from herself in longer than she could remember. James stopped immediately. He said, in a completely different voice, "What happened?" Not a question. He already knew something had. She said, "I will tell you later." He said, "I will be at your apartment in an hour." She said, "Do not come to the apartment." A pause. Then quietly, "Where should I come?" She thought about it. "The clinic," she said. "Meet me at the clinic." And she started the car. The coordinated removal happened 3 weeks later. Barbara arrived at the apartment on a Tuesday evening with Amber beside her, and the two of them moved through the rooms with the efficiency of a demolition crew, pulling clothes from the closet, sweeping Claire's things from the bathroom shelves into garbage bags, stacking boxes by the door with the organized momentum of people who had planned this and were enjoying the execution. Derek stood in the living room and delivered the lines his mother had written for him. "This is not working anymore. I want you gone tonight. I do not love you. I am not certain I ever did." Barbara handed him the final pressure point at the end. "Either she leaves by midnight or I am done helping with rent." Financial ultimatum dressed as maternal concern. The oldest move in her book. Derek nodded, like he had made this decision himself. Amber, sitting on the couch with her phone, said to Derek in a voice designed to carry, "Should I post this? People love authentic moments." Derek looked at her with an expression that was only slightly uncomfortable, which was somehow worse than if he had not been uncomfortable at all. He said, "Not yet." Amber shrugged and kept filming. Claire watched all of it. She watched 3 people erase her from a home she had built with her own patience and her own love, and she did not argue. She did not cry. She did not recite the history of what she had given to this marriage. The double shifts at the clinic so Derek could chase a promotion. The meals she cooked for Barbara, even after Barbara insulted them. The quiet, steady presence she had offered this man through every bout of self-doubt and professional disappointment. She picked up her suitcase. She touched the compass rose at her throat. She opened the front door. The rain hit her like a wall of cold water. She stepped off the porch carefully, one hand on her belly, the suitcase dragging through the pooled water on the sidewalk. Behind her, Barbara appeared in the doorway and threw a second bag, a garbage bag, full of whatever she had swept from the closet, into the front yard. It landed in a puddle and split open. Claire's clothes floated in the dirty water. A dress she had worn to their first anniversary dinner drifted into the gutter. Then Derek came out onto the porch. He stood there in the rain, shirt soaking through, and he looked at his pregnant wife struggling through the storm with her suitcase. He looked at her and did not feel shame. He did not feel anything that resembled a human conscience completing its function. What he felt in that moment was irritation that this was taking so long. He crossed the porch in 4 steps, and he shoved her, both hands flat against her back, hard, the kind of shove that is not a push, but a statement, a declaration. You are the obstacle, and I am removing you. Claire went off the curb, knees first, then palms, then her body pitched forward and her belly pressed against the cold, wet asphalt as a pickup truck swerved around her, horns screaming, tires shrieking against the slick road, headlights cutting through the rain. She lay face down on a public street, 8 months pregnant, rain washing over her, like the sky itself was trying to clean away what had just happened. From the porch, Amber laughed. From the doorway, Barbara said, finally. Derek walked back inside and closed the door. He did not look back. None of them did. Across the street, Ruth Gallagher, 74 years old, retired school teacher, 2 cats, a porch she used in all weather, and a moral clarity that had only sharpened with age, had been watching from behind her screen door with her coffee going cold in her hands. She called 911 with shaking fingers. Then she called James Calloway because she had his number from the parking ticket dispute 2 years ago, and she had never deleted it, and she had always had good instincts about who to call in a crisis. The paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. Danny Kowalski worked fast and carefully, the way good paramedics do, talking to Claire in a low, steady voice while his hands moved through their practiced sequence. He was securing the stretcher straps when he saw the pendant. His hands stopped. He leaned in slightly. Compass rose, sapphire at true north, the specific craftsmanship of something that was not purchased at a retail counter. He looked at Claire's face. Then he stepped back from the stretcher and switched channels on his radio. His partner Kevin watched this and said, quietly, "Why did you switch channels?" Danny said, "Stand by." Kevin said, "Danny, why did you?" Danny spoke into the radio. 4 words, clipped and precise. "We have a Montgomery." Kevin said, "What does that?" 2 black SUVs appeared at the end of the block. No lights, no sirens. Moving through the rain with the specific quiet authority of something that does not need to announce itself. Kevin said, "Oh." Danny said, "Yes. Now stop talking." A man in a dark overcoat stepped from the lead vehicle, walked directly to the stretcher, looked at the pendant, and nodded once. He spoke 2 words into a phone and stepped back. The ambulance began moving. Kevin, in a very small voice, said, "Are we in trouble?" Danny said, "We are not in trouble. We are in the presence of something significantly larger than trouble. There is a difference." He paused. "We are also getting a raise, I think." Claire, conscious and barely responsive on the stretcher, her fingers wrapped around the compass, rose with a grip that had whitened her knuckles, heard none of this. She was somewhere quieter, somewhere deeper, the way the body goes when it has reached the outer limit of what it can hold and begins the quiet work of managing the essential things. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes were half closed, but her hand never let go of the pendant. Not for 1 second. The ambulance was rerouted before it reached Hartford General's main entrance. The Montgomery Protocol, embedded in the Trust's agreements with 3 Connecticut hospitals, activated by the biometric signature of the pendant's hidden identification chip, redirected Claire to the private maternal wing on the 8th floor. A suite funded entirely by the Trust and staffed by a hand-selected team of specialists who answered to one person. Nurse Patty Henderson had worked that floor for 22 years. She was 56, plain-spoken, had seen everything twice, and maintained opinions about everything she had seen. She had been present for the only other Montgomery Protocol activation in her tenure, a minor emergency involving a trust board member's wife years ago, and she had handled that one with the same brisk competence she brought to everything. She took one look at Claire as the stretcher came through the door, assessed the situation with the speed of someone who had spent 2 decades reading people in crisis, and turned to her team. "Everyone on this floor," she said, "just received a raise they do not know about yet. Act accordingly." The team moved. Claire was in a sealed suite within minutes. No name on the door. Climate-controlled, softly lit, monitored with the best equipment the trust's budget could specify, which was the best equipment that existed. Every nurse on the floor had signed a non-disclosure agreement on their first day. The corridor was secured. Patty sat beside Claire and took her hand and said, in the direct way she had with patients, "You are safe. The baby is stable. We are going to take very good care of both of you. Do you understand me?" Claire looked at her. She said, "Yes." Patty said, "Good." Then she said, "The man who did this to you, does he know where you are?" Claire said no. Patty said, "It is going to stay that way." She delivered Henry Edward at 3:52 in the morning. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, healthy, strong. He came into the world with one sharp cry that filled the private suite like a declaration. Something new has arrived, and it intends to stay. And then he settled. He was placed on Claire's chest, and he found her heartbeat, and matched his breathing to it, his tiny fingers curling against her skin, his whole body recognizing the person who had carried him through the storm. The room went quiet the way rooms do in moments that are irreversible and beautiful. The nurses stepped back. The monitors beeped softly. Patty stood at the door for a moment, watching, and allowed herself the small, private expression she reserved for moments like this. Something between satisfaction and reverence. Before she turned and went to update the chart, Claire pressed her lips to the top of her son's head. She whispered his name, Henry Edward, chosen before any of this. Named for her father before she knew she would need her father the way she was going to need him. She closed her eyes, for the first time in months. She breathed from somewhere deep. Edward Montgomery arrived just after 6 in the morning. He came alone. No visible entourage, though his security was there. They were always there, at a distance that honored his daughter's wish for independence while making clear that the distance had limits. He walked into the suite. He stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at the bruises on Claire's palms, the scrape on her knee from where she had hit the asphalt, the monitor leads, his grandson asleep on his daughter's chest. Fingers still curled around the compass rose pendant. He stood there for a long time and said nothing. Edward Montgomery had built an empire out of silence. He understood what it communicated in ways that words frequently did not. And in that moment, his silence was carrying something too large for any sentence to hold. Then he said quietly, "Hi, Claire Bear." She said, "Hi, Dad." He crossed the room and sat down in the chair beside the bed. He took her hand, carefully, around the IV line, and held it. He did not offer solutions. He did not begin the conversation about what would happen next. He simply sat there, present and still, and let his daughter know without saying it that she was no longer alone in any of this. Sometimes, the narrator said gently, the most powerful thing another person can do for you in your worst moment is simply arrive and stay. No agenda, no solutions, just presence. If you have someone in your life who knows how to do that, who can sit with you in the dark without trying to immediately turn on a light, hold on to them. They are rarer than any inheritance and worth more. They sat together, as the Hartford morning came gray and slow through the window, and Henry slept between them. And outside the hospital, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday, as if nothing had happened. 3 miles away, Derek Shaw poured himself a bowl of cereal and watched sports highlights. Amber moved into the apartment that same week. Her clothes replaced Claire's in the closet. Her products replaced Claire's on the bathroom shelves. Barbara came over on Friday with a bottle of Prosecco and new throw pillows from the home goods store and the energy of a woman who had won something she had been pursuing for 3 years. They toasted. Derek accepted the congratulations of the people around him with the slightly dazed quality of a man who had gotten what he thought he wanted and was discovering that it did not feel the way he had expected. He told himself this was adjustment. He told himself it would settle. He tried to cook dinner for Amber on Saturday evening. This was not a skill he had developed during his marriage, because Claire had cooked and he had not volunteered to change that arrangement. He set off the smoke alarm, attempting pasta. Then again, with the garlic bread. Amber stood in the kitchen, waving a dish towel at the smoke detector, and when the alarm finally stopped, she looked at Derek and said, "She did this every night?" Derek said, "She made it look easy." There was a pause. Neither of them said anything else for a while. At the hospital, Claire healed. She spent 4 days on the 8th floor while her body recovered and Henry grew stronger, and Patty Henderson ran her corridor with the brisk authority of someone who had not spent 22 years doing this to be questioned about it now. On the 3rd day, Patty brought Claire a cup of tea that was actually good, a fact Patty acknowledged had required significant effort given what passed for a kitchen on a hospital floor, and sat in the chair across from her and said, "You are going to be fine, you know." Claire said, "I know." Patty said, "I have watched a lot of women come through a version of what you came through. The ones who know they are going to be fine before anyone tells them. They always are." Claire looked at her and said, "Have you always been this direct with patients?" Patty said, "I have been this direct with everyone since 1991. It has caused some friction over the years. I have no regrets." On the 4th day, James arrived. He came with flowers, yellow tulips, her favorite, which he had remembered since they were 12, and 2 cups of terrible hospital cafeteria coffee, and the expression of a man who had already spent several hours in the very focused mode that his Harvard legal training produced when he was genuinely angry about something. He set the flowers on the windowsill. He handed her a coffee. He sat down. Claire said, "I have not even told you everything yet," James said. "Ruth Gallagher called me the night it happened. Your father called me 6 minutes later. And before I drove to the hospital, I watched the video Amber posted online, the one from that night. Before she took it down, she posted it for approximately 6 minutes before someone advised her this was a significant mistake." He paused. "I have a copy. Fully authenticated. Time-stamped." Claire said. "She posted it." James said, "She did?" He set down his coffee. "Claire, I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Are you ready to let me do my job?" She looked at him for a moment. Henry was asleep in the bassinet beside her. The compass rose pendant rested at her collarbone, its sapphire catching the morning light. She said yes. James nodded. He said, "Then here's where we start." They talked for 2 hours. When he left, James walked down the 8th floor corridor with the specific energy of a man who has identified a clear path forward through a complicated problem and is looking forward to the work. Patty Henderson watched him go from the nurse's station and said, "To no one in particular, I give that man 3 days before something significant happens." It took 4. James filed for emergency protective custody of Henry on a Thursday morning. The evidence was unambiguous. The time-stamped security footage from the building across the street, which had cameras covering the Birchwood Arms entrance and had been subpoenaed within 48 hours of James filing. The authenticated copy of Amber's 6-minute video, the medical records documenting Claire's injuries and Henry's premature stress indicators, the paramedic report. The judge reviewed the submission on Friday afternoon and granted immediate temporary sole custody to Claire before close of business. James sent Claire a text message that said, "Only done." She read it sitting in the garden at her father's Connecticut estate, Henry asleep in a bassinet beside the stone bench, the same bench where Edward had given her the pendant 9 years ago. The oak trees were moving in the October wind. The light was low and golden. She allowed herself, for the first time since the night of the storm, to feel something that resembled safety. She called James. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Do not thank me yet. Derek has 48 hours to respond." She said, "I know. But today, thank you." He said, "You are welcome. Now rest. I will call you Monday." She sat in the garden with her son and breathed and let herself believe, for 3 days, that the worst was over. It was not. On Monday morning, a story appeared on the website of a national tabloid with a readership of 12 million. The headline read, "Reclusive Trillionaire's daughter hiding with newborn in Connecticut compound. Husband claims child abducted." Amber had filed the story through a contact of Victor Hales, with strategic timing and a carefully assembled collection of half-truths, manipulated photographs, and invented quotes from unnamed sources. The framing was deliberate. Claire was an unstable woman who had left her husband without cause and was now sequestering their child in a controlled environment maintained by a secretive and unaccountable wealthy patriarch. The story was live before Claire woke up. By 9 in the morning, 2 cable news morning shows had picked it up. By 10, Derek's attorney, now operating on a retainer funded by Victor Hale's organization, though this would not emerge for another week, had filed an emergency counterpetition with the family court, challenging the temporary custody order on the grounds that the child was being held in an inappropriate environment. James called at 10:15. Claire was already watching the coverage on her laptop, Henry in her arms. He said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. This is a coordinated attack, and it was planned in advance. It is not random. Are you somewhere safe?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Do not speak to any press. Do not respond to anything online. I am filing responses today. But Claire, there is more." There was more. Victor Hale held a press conference at noon. He appeared on camera for the first time in 11 years, a deliberate, calculated emergence, and claimed that the Montgomery Medical Trust had engaged in predatory acquisition practices, silenced whistleblowers, and engaged in financial misconduct across 3 hospital networks. He had documentation, he said. He had sources. He was prepared to pursue this publicly. Every word of it was fabricated, strategically assembled from mischaracterized data, selectively edited communications, and manufactured testimony. But it landed at the precise moment designed to do maximum damage, 48 hours before the custody hearing, when Edward Montgomery's credibility was about to be relevant. 3 of the Trust's major hospital partnership contracts went into emergency review by their respective boards. Edward, in his study, made 2 phone calls and said nothing to Claire about any of it. The third blow came by end of day. Amber had located Claire's former nursing supervisor at the Hartford clinic. Through means that would later emerge as straightforward coercion, a threat to the supervisor's pension through a connection to the hospital's board, She had obtained a signed statement claiming that Claire had exhibited emotional instability during her tenure at the clinic, that she had been counseled twice for erratic behavior, and that there were concerns about her fitness for caregiving responsibilities. The statement was filed with the family court at 4:57 in the afternoon. James called Claire at 5:15. He read her the statement in full. She sat down on the kitchen floor of her father's house. She sat there for a while without moving. Henry was in his bassinet across the room. The compass rose rested at her collarbone. Through the window, she could see the garden, the stone bench, the oak trees, the exact spot where her father had told her she would never need anyone's permission to know her own worth. She held the pendant, she breathed, and she made a decision. Here is what nobody tells you about fighting for yourself, the narrator said. Sometimes the first win is bait. The real fight comes after, when you are exhausted, and they are not, when you thought it was over, and they reveal it was never close to over. The women who survive this are not the ones who are never afraid. They are the ones who feel the fear completely and then decide, consciously, deliberately, that tired is not the same as finished. She got up off the kitchen floor. She called James. She said, "Tell me what we need." Edward did not hold press conferences. He did not issue statements or appear on television or respond to Victor Hale's claims in any public forum. He made phone calls the way he had always done everything that mattered, quietly, with complete precision, and with 11 years of preparation that Victor Hale had not accounted for because Victor Hale had never fully understood what he was dealing with. The defamation suit landed on Victor Hale's attorney's desk at 8 in the morning, the day after the press conference. It was accompanied by a document package containing 11 years of compiled evidence, surveillance records, financial interference documentation, business harassment patterns, and 3 separate instances of attempted corporate espionage against the trust, all cataloged and cross-referenced and waiting for exactly this moment. The 3 hospital partnership contracts that had gone into emergency review received counter-documentation packages from the trust's legal team by early afternoon. The packages were thorough enough that all 3 boards reinstated their contracts before the close of business. Edward's team identified the coercion mechanism used against Claire's nursing supervisor within 36 hours. The supervisor, when contacted by a separate investigator and informed that her pension was not in fact at risk and that the threat used against her was fraudulent, recanted her statement immediately and filed her own complaint, naming Amber Cole as the source of the coercion. The recantation was filed with the family court the following morning, and a federal investigation into Victor Hale's financial practices, which had been building quietly for 2 years through a separate agency entirely unrelated to any of this, received a motivated referral that moved the timeline forward by approximately 18 months. James, watching all of this from his office over 3 days, called Claire on Wednesday afternoon. He said, "Your father dismantled an 11-year coordinated campaign in approximately 4 business days." Claire said, "He has had the file since the 2nd year." James said, "The 2nd year of what?" Claire said, "Of Victor's campaign. He identified Victor's interest in 2015 and has been documenting since then." There was a pause. James said, "I went to Harvard Law. I have been practicing for 9 years. I want you to know that I am sitting here, eating a sandwich, and feeling genuinely humbled." Claire said, "He respects you enormously, James." James said, "He has a strange way of showing it. He is making everything I do look decorative." Claire laughed. James said, "There she is." He said it quietly, with the warmth of someone who had known her since they were children and understood what her laugh meant when it had been missing. Meanwhile, Derek's world was unraveling in the specific, merciless way that things unravel when the foundation they were built on turns out to have belonged to someone else. His CEO, Thomas Reed, received a letter from the Montgomery Trust's legal department on a Tuesday. The letter informed him, in precise legal language, that the trust held a 34% controlling stake in Reed and Shaw Consulting through a subsidiary holding company, a position the trust had maintained for 6 years quietly through a layered structure that none of Reed's executives had ever traced to its source. The letter further informed Mr. Reed that the trust had initiated a strategic portfolio review and would be in contact regarding recommended changes to the company's organizational structure. Thomas Reed called Derek into his office the next morning and closed the door. Derek's keycard stopped working at the building entrance the following day. A security guard met him in the lobby with a cardboard box containing his personal items and an envelope with 2 months of severance. There was no meeting. There was no formal exit conversation. There was an envelope and a box and a guard who was professionally sympathetic and said nothing beyond the minimum required. Derek called Amber from the parking lot. She did not answer. He called again. He called Barbara. She answered, and she screamed at him about the foreclosure notice she had received that morning. His co-signature on her investment property's mortgage was now a liability the bank was moving to collect, and Barbara was discovering what happened to financial structures built on someone else's income when that income disappeared. Derek drove home. Amber's car was in the parking lot. He went upstairs. Her suitcases were lined up by the door. He stood in the doorway and looked at them. Then he looked at her. She was pulling a coat from the closet with the efficient focus of someone who has already made their decision and is simply executing it. He said, "Amber, please." She looked at him, the same flat, indifferent gaze she had once aimed at Claire from the couch. She said, "I did not sign up for this." She walked out the front door with her bags. Nobody shoved her. She left entirely on her own terms, the way people like Amber always do. Present when the table is full and gone the instant the plates are cleared. Derek sat down on the couch in an apartment that now contained only himself and a leaky faucet and the slowly accumulating evidence of every choice he had made. Outside, it was raining. Edward made one phone call to the Hartford Children's Medical Foundation. The Montgomery Trust, he said, would fund the entire new pediatric wing. Every room, every piece of equipment, every dollar. $200 million committed immediately on one condition. His daughter would present the donation in person at the annual charity gala in front of everyone. The gala was 3 weeks away. The foundation's executive director agreed before Edward finished the sentence. The night came like a verdict the city had not known it was waiting for. The Hartford Marriott Grand Ballroom held 500 guests in black tie, crystal chandeliers, a live jazz ensemble at the entrance, waitstaff moving between tables with champagne on silver trays. The kind of room where power dressed in cufflinks and called it philanthropy. Derek was there. His invitation had been issued weeks earlier, before the restructuring, when he was still someone Thomas Reed put at tables like this. He had not been formally uninvited. He had brought Amber before her departure, but she was gone, so he came alone, and he sat at the table with Thomas Reed and 3 other executives and tried to hold himself together in a room that felt, inexplicably, like something was about to happen. Barbara had talked her way into a seat at an adjacent table, wearing borrowed confidence and a dress that was almost right. The evening moved through its choreography, speeches, a silent auction, polite sustained applause. Then the host approached the podium and waited for the room to settle. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it is my distinct honor to introduce the individual whose generosity has made tonight's central project possible. The entire children's wing, every room, every piece of equipment, every dollar has been provided by a single commitment. Please welcome to the stage Zara. He paused, correcting himself. Claire Montgomery, daughter of Edward Montgomery, sole heir to the Montgomery Medical and Technology Trust. The ballroom doors at the far end of the room opened, and Claire walked in. She wore a deep navy gown that moved when she walked. Her hair was simply arranged. Her makeup was minimal. She did not need more. And at her collarbone, the compass rose, pendant, caught every crystal of light from every chandelier in that vast, bright room, the sapphire blazing at true north like it had been waiting for this exact moment to perform its function. She was flanked by 2 members of Edward's legal team and walked with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had already decided that nothing in this room had the power to touch her. Derek saw her. His champagne glass tilted in his hand, and its contents spilled across the white tablecloth, and he did not notice. His mouth opened. No words came. Barbara's expression, the controlled, ever-managing, always ready with something expression she had maintained in every room she had occupied for 40 years, went entirely blank. Every word she had ever spoken about this woman turned to something she could not name in her throat. Thomas Reed, sitting 3 seats from Derek, looked at the stage, and then at Derek, and then back at the stage, doing a calculation that landed on an answer he had not expected. Claire reached the podium. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the room. She did not look at Derek's table, not once. She spoke in the same quiet, steady voice she had always used, the voice they had called empty, the voice they had mistaken, consistently and catastrophically, for the absence of something rather than its most concentrated form. She said the wing was being dedicated to every mother who was told she had nothing, to the women who got up off the ground and built something extraordinary anyway, to the ones who held on in the dark and did not let go. She spoke about her son. She did not say his father's name. She touched the compass rose pendant. Just once, she said, "This is for every woman who knows what it costs to stay quiet, and what it means when the quiet finally ends." 500 people rose. The applause was thunderous. Through that wall of sound, Derek pushed back his chair. He moved toward the stage, pushing between tables, saying her name. Claire. Claire, please. I did not know. You have to let me explain. I did not know who you were. 2 of Edward's security personnel stepped into his path before he reached the 30-foot mark. They did not touch him. They simply stopped moving, and Derek stopped too, because there was nowhere to go. And the wall he had run into was built from every decision he had ever made in this story. Claire turned. She looked at him from the stage, not through him, at him. She saw him completely. The man she had married, the man she had loved, the man who had put both hands on her back and shoved her off a curb while she carried his child. She saw all of it, and she held all of it, and her face held no anger and no hatred and no satisfaction. She said 4 words, quietly, clearly, for him alone. "I already forgave you." And she turned and walked off the stage. Forgiveness was not what Derek had prepared for. Rage he could have worked with. Hatred would have given him something to push against. But forgiveness, real, complete, offered without transaction by a woman who owed him nothing and needed nothing from him, was the thing that broke him entirely, because it took away the last story he had been telling himself. The story where she was damaged and he was owed something. The story where this was complicated. It was not complicated, and her forgiveness made that undeniable. James met Claire in the side corridor as she came off the stage. His face was wrong. She said, "What happened?" He said, "Derek's attorney filed an emergency motion 2 hours ago. The custody hearing has been moved to tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. They are claiming the estate is an inappropriate environment. They submitted photographs of the security infrastructure. They are calling it a controlled compound." She looked at him. He said, "If we do not have a complete evidentiary response filed before 9 a.m." She said, "Do we?" He said, "I have been working on it since 4 this afternoon. It is almost ready. I need 2 more hours." She said, "Then go finish it." He looked at her. He said, "Claire," she said, "James, go finish it. I will be there at 8:45. He went. She stood in the corridor for a moment, alone. The sound of 500 people, applauding, leaked through the wall behind her. She held the pendant. She breathed. She walked to the car where her father was waiting with Henry, and she held her son, and she did not sleep that night. And when the alarm went off at 6 in the morning, she was already dressed. The courtroom was quiet and fluorescent lit at 9:07 a.m. Derek's attorney presented the estate security documentation first: the cameras, the personnel, the perimeter infrastructure. He used the word compound 4 times and controlled environment 3 times, and expressed concern for the child's access to normal socialization with the frequency of someone who had been told these were his best arguments and was working with what he had. Then James stood up. He presented his evidence in sequence, without theatrics, in the plain, methodical voice of someone who does not need theatrics, because what he is holding speaks more loudly than he ever could. Exhibit A. Security camera footage from the building directly across from the Birchwood Arms, time-stamped and authenticated, covering the full duration of the incident on the night in question. Played in full, with audio in a completely silent courtroom. Every person in that room watched Derek Shaw put both hands flat against his 8 months pregnant wife's back and shove her off a curb into the street as a truck swerved around her. No one spoke when the footage ended. Exhibit B. Amber Cole's original video, recovered, authenticated, and preserved, posted to a public platform for 6 minutes before being deleted, showing the interior of the apartment in the moments before Claire was told to leave, showing Amber filming, showing Barbara's expression, showing Derek's performance of the lines his mother had written. Exhibit C, a documented chain of communications between Victor Hale's associate and Amber Cole, establishing that the coercion of Claire's nursing supervisor was directed, planned, and executed as part of a coordinated effort to interfere with the custody proceedings, including the specific text message that read, "Get something on the Montgomery woman. Anything you can make. Stick." Exhibit D. The nursing supervisor's recantation, her own sworn statement describing the nature of the threat used against her, the falsity of the original statement she had signed, and her identification of Amber Cole as the source of the coercion. Exhibit E. A character statement from Nurse Patricia Henderson, RN, 22 years at Hartford General's Montgomery Wing, present at the delivery of the child in question. James read it aloud. Patty had written, "I have worked in maternal care for 22 years. I have watched women in every kind of crisis imaginable. Claire Montgomery is the calmest, most present, most consistently focused mother I have encountered in a delivery room. She was shoved off a curb at 8 months pregnant in a rainstorm, was brought to our floor in serious condition, delivered a healthy son 4 hours later, and the first thing she did when she could speak clearly was ask whether the baby had everything he needed, not whether she would be all right, whether he would. Her son is fortunate. Whatever environment he is raised in with her in it is, by definition, an appropriate one. The courtroom was very quiet when James finished reading. Derek's attorney shuffled his papers. He said nothing. The judge looked at the documentation for a full minute before speaking. She said, "Permanent sole custody is awarded to the mother. The father may petition for supervised visitation in no fewer than 18 months, contingent upon demonstrated and documented behavioral change. This court is additionally referring the coercion documentation included in Exhibit C to the district attorney's office for review." She closed the folder. She said, "We are adjourned." Derek sat completely still. In the gallery, two men in dark overcoats approached the row where Amber had taken a seat and said, quietly, that they would like to speak with her regarding Victor Hale, and that she might want to contact her attorney before they left the building. Amber looked at them and said nothing. Barbara sat 3 rows back. She looked at her son from across the room, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years without the filter of her own agenda, and saw clearly what her fear and her need for control had built. A man sitting alone in a courtroom that had just finished deciding every important thing about his future. A man with no job, no partner, no mother who could reach him across that distance, and a son he would not see for at least 18 months. She had done this with the best intentions and the worst methods, the way people always do, the most damage. Convinced they are protecting someone while actually just protecting themselves. She said nothing. She sat with it. James gathered his files, capped his pen, and leaned slightly toward Claire. He said, "Patty Henderson's statement was better written than my law review article." Claire said, "She told me she has been waiting 22 years to write something like that." James said, "I'm going to send her flowers." Claire said, "She told me if anyone sends flowers, she will return them and ask for a donation to the nurses' union instead." James said, "I am going to make a very significant donation to the nurses' union." They walked out of the courtroom together into a gray November morning, and Claire carried Henry on her chest in the carrier she had put on before they left the house, and he slept through all of it. The drive, the courthouse, the verdict, the entire complicated machinery of his parents' story, with the uncomplicated piece of someone who does not yet know that the world is difficult because the person holding him has decided it is her job to give him time before he needs to. 6 months later, early April, Connecticut. The oak trees had come back green after a long, colorless winter. The air on the Montgomery estate smelled like cut grass and the particular quality of quiet that exists in a place that has known you since before the world had opinions about you. Claire sat on the stone bench, the same stone bench where she was 16 years old and her father placed a compass around her neck and told her she would never need permission to know her own worth. The bench was cool in the April morning, and the light was coming at that low angle that makes everything look slightly more significant than usual, the way early spring light does, like the world is making an effort. Henry was 7 months old. He was awake, sitting propped against her arm, with the focused intensity of someone encountering everything for the first time and finding it all worthy of serious consideration. A bird in the oak tree above them, the movement of shadows on the grass, the pendant at his mother's collarbone, which he had located with the unerring radar of babies for shiny objects and gripped with both hands. His fingers were wrapped around the compass rose. Claire let him hold it. She looked at his hands, small and certain and completely themselves. Edward came out of the house with 2 cups of coffee. He walked across the garden without hurrying, the way he did everything, and sat down beside his daughter on the bench. He handed her a cup. They watched Henry together for a while. Then Edward said, "He has your mother's hands." Claire looked at her son's hands. She had never seen a photograph of her mother's hands. She had asked once, years ago, and Edward had found one, a single photograph, her mother laughing at something, hands in motion, and shown her, and then carefully put it away. She filed this observation away the way she filed everything her father said about her mother, like treasure discovered slowly, in pieces. She said, "Tell me something else about her." Edward said, "She would have sat on this bench with him. She sat here every morning when the weather allowed it. She said the light in this garden was the best light on the property, and she was right." A pause. Claire said, "I think I understand why you never dated anyone else." Edward said, "Nothing was missing." She looked at him. He said, "I had you, and I had the memory of her, and I had enough to do. Nothing was missing, Claire Bear." Henry made a sound, not quite a word but shaped like one, the beginning of the architecture of language, and tightened both hands on the compass rose pendant with a conviction that suggested he had decided it was his now. Claire laughed, quietly, fully, from somewhere real and deep. The laugh that James always said he could identify by sound alone, the one she produced when she was not performing anything. Edward watched her laugh and smiled. He did not say anything. He drank his coffee. The morning moved around them, the birds active in the trees, the shadows shifting, Henry's small, decisive sounds punctuating the quiet. Here's what happened to everyone in the time that followed. Derek Shaw signed the divorce papers on a rainy Wednesday evening, alone at the kitchen table in the apartment he could barely afford. He signed them slowly, reading each page, which was the first careful thing he had done in a long time. He moved to a studio in a different part of Hartford. He started seeing a therapist. Not because anyone required it, but because he had spent a long time alone in that apartment with the truth about himself and had decided he needed help with what to do with it. Whether he becomes someone better is a story he has to write himself. Claire neither knows nor monitors how it is going. That is not her story anymore. Barbara called once, 4 months after the gala on a Sunday afternoon in February. Claire answered, which surprised them both. Barbara said, "I do not expect anything from this call. I am not asking for anything. I wanted to say that you were never what I said you were. I knew it while I was saying it. I knew it, and I said it anyway. And I wanted you to know that I know that." Claire said, "I know." A long pause. Barbara said, "James sent me a photo from the gala. Before everything happened, you looked like someone." Claire said, "I looked like my mother, apparently." Barbara said, "I was going to say you looked like yourself, like who you actually are." The call lasted 9 minutes. It was the beginning of something that had no name yet. Real things rarely arrive fully formed. They arrive the way spring does. Tentative at first, then insistent, then suddenly everywhere. Amber Cole cooperated with federal investigators in exchange for reduced charges. The cooperation was comprehensive enough that Victor Hale's 11-year campaign against the Montgomery Trust concluded with a federal indictment and a level of press coverage that Victor had very specifically not intended to generate. His 11 years of patient, methodical effort produced, in the end, exactly the public attention he had always sought to avoid. James Calloway established a family law practice with a focus on protective custody cases. The Montgomery case, suitably anonymized, became the framework for his intake assessment process. Patty Henderson attended his office opening and brought a casserole that everyone agreed was genuinely excellent. James sent a donation to the Hartford Nurses Union, a significant one. Patty acknowledged this with a handwritten note that read, "Appropriate." She underlined the word twice, "Henry Edward Shaw Montgomery." He would carry both names because Claire had decided the name was not the man, and her son deserved to make his own accounting of his father someday, with full information. Grew stronger every week. He had his mother's eyes. He had his grandfather's hands, according to Edward, or his grandmother's, according to the photograph in the drawer. He had his own expressions, his own tempo, his own particular way of examining the world with an attention that suggested he intended to be here for a while and was not going to miss anything. He held the compass, rose, pendant, every morning in the garden. Claire led him. On the stone bench, in the April light, with her coffee going warm in her hand, and her father beside her, and her son's small, certain fingers around the silver compass at her collarbone, she thought about what she would tell Henry when he was old enough to ask about this story. She thought about it for a while. She decided she would tell him the truth, all of it, not as a lesson, and not as a cautionary tale, and not as an explanation of anyone's failures, just as the truth, which was that his mother had loved someone, and that love had not protected her from being hurt, and that she had been hurt very badly, and that she had held on to the one thing she had always known about herself, and that it had been enough. Not because she had a powerful father, or a loyal friend, or a nurse who wrote clearly and without sentimentality. Those things had helped. They had helped enormously. But the holding on that had come from her. She would tell him that silence is not the absence of power, that sometimes silence is power in its most concentrated form, a force that does not need volume or performance or anyone watching to be real, that the people who misread it, who look at a quiet woman and see submission, who look at softness and call it weakness, who look at stillness and assume there is nothing underneath it, those people are not seeing clearly. They are seeing what they need to see to keep believing what they already believe. And that is their limitation, not hers. She would tell him that the compass does not need to be loud to point true north. It just needs to be held. Edward said, "What are you thinking about?" She said, "What I am going to tell him about all of this. When he is old enough." Edward said, "What are you going to tell him?" She thought about it for one more moment. She said, "I am going to tell him that his grandmother gave his grandfather a compass, and that his grandfather gave it to his mother, and that his mother held on to it when everything else was gone, and that it worked." Edward looked at her, then he looked at Henry, who was still gripping the pendant with both hands with the focused satisfaction of someone who has acquired something important. Edward said, "That is a good story." Claire said, "It is a true story." He said, "Those are the best kind." Henry made another sound, louder this time, emphatic, the sound of a person who has something to say and is working on the equipment to say it. He looked up at the oak tree above them with an expression of profound concentration. The wind moved the branches, the light shifted, the morning continued. And in the garden that had known Claire Montgomery since before the world had any opinions about who she was, a woman sat on a stone bench with a compass at her throat, and her son in her arms, and her father beside her, and the particular stillness of someone who has not given up, who has not retreated, who has not become small or bitter or cautious in the way that people become when they survive something terrible, the stillness of someone who has arrived. The people who underestimated her did not just lose, they did not just regret, they shattered, down to the last story they told themselves about who she was. And she was here, still here, quietly, completely, irreversibly here. If something in this story found you, if you recognized yourself in the way she stood in the rain, or the way she held on in the dark, or the way she sat across from people who told her she was nothing and said nothing back, then you already know what she knew. The compass does not need to be loud. It just needs to be held. Editorial disclaimer. The story you just heard was researched, constructed, and manually edited by our team, built from the ground up to carry meaning, not just drama. Every character, every scene, and every lesson was shaped by hand, with intention, for you. We believe the stories we choose to tell reflect the values we choose to live by. Thank you for listening.